Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. How's everyone today?
Everything's good. Thank you.
All's good, thanks.
Well,
We're doing well, thanks.
I was wondering if the rest of y'all was gone to me. Sound like only Mr. Ferguson was answering me this morning. What's going on? What happened? Y'all have too much to read, eh?
it was a lot to read.
Definitely.
Yes.
That's why there's an international certification.
Mhm.
The level at which you're expected to work is international diploma level, right? So, how many of y'all have questions from Unit 6? I'm expecting questions because I'm Unit 6. The average person on working financial services don't normally talk about terrorism financing and proliferation. So I know some of you have some questions if you all read. Don't all just talk one time.
I don't really have any questions, but Unit 6 dealt with the various, I guess, terrorism financing based on various countries like the US, the UK. But it didn't really touch much on the Bahamas. So I think we probably need to touch more on the Bahamas aspect of it.
We will. And Angela, you work in financial services, so you hear these things.
I do.
People that don't work in financial services is who I'm going to hear from. Even though Angela is right, and we will talk about a little about it in the Bahamas. Like I said to you, because it's an international diploma, they're going to focus on the large countries. Obviously, the UK is going to be number one because it's a UK-based education. Oh, Ma, what's going on? Why sound like you falling on? Sam, anything from you?
Well, the only thing I really have a question on when we get to it is the dual use goods. How to spot and identify it, because I know in my bank we did have somebody was purchasing magnesium ingots. So I'm just curious as to how can you tell someone who's purchasing use goods for regular use as opposed to for terrorism use, because they say it also depends on the grading of the alloy that you look out for. So I'm just curious to see how we can spot that and if someone is doing some sort of trade financing and purchasing goods, how do you identify something that's a dual use good based on the grading, if you can, to identify that it shouldn't include?
That's a good point, because the reality of it is, how many of us as compliance officers even know about the alloy percentages? How many of us even know about the dual use goods that you can use, obviously for commercial purposes, for other things, and you can use to make weapons of mass destruction, right?
Yep.
So that's a really, really good point that you brought up. We can discuss when we get to that point, because a lot of times compliance officers sit in banks, they have no clue about things of that nature. However, they are normally only trained to notice the money part of it, right? So
Okay.
remember, I keep telling you guys, you have to be well read. You have to try stay in the know. You have to read articles. It's not just your book. You have to try put things together as a compliance officer. You gotta know a little about anything that involves money that your client's dealing. You have to have some basic knowledge about it, because in this particular case, the average person won't have a clue. So you see your client is in the business of producing whatever it is, but that good can also be used to make weapons of mass destruction, right? It's your job as a compliance professional to go and educate yourself Because when questions need to be asked, I always tell my kids, you get the answer based on the question. So if you're not asking the right questions, then you're not going to be getting the right answers, right? So you need to
Right.
know what to ask, is the point I'm trying to make. But you won't know what to ask if you don't have a clue about what's going on with it and what it is and how much percentage and all of these other things. So good point. Anybody else? Mr. Ferguson, you're in law enforcement, nothing?
I mean, because this is a very sensitive and peculiar regime. I'd like to know who's the watchdog locally for terrorism financing and this proliferation financing, because it could be overwhelming for FATF if they, I mean, that's just my perspective. This is very intricate. I mean, if the gentleman beforehand raised a key point. You're talking about looking for specific things, specific warning signs, and what have you. And I'm just as I read through this, that was the first thing I wrote down. Actually, do we have a specific office locally for this? Because I mean, the Bahamas is kind of vulnerable in terms of we've been vulnerable in the past with persons using the Bahamas for, whatever their base for financial operations. So I was just concerned about that, because we have a particular office for this, because this is a specific investigation. This isn't the normal financial concerns, as you would have alluded to. Persons normally in the financial environment wouldn't know a lot of these intricate things. It was just a thought.
You in law enforcement. So I'm thinking the police force should have a unit that deals with terrorism and proliferation financing, even if it's not a special unit. They have a financial crimes unit. And I'm sure between financial crimes and the FIU and so they have an anti-terrorism unit, according to Mr. Neely, who's also in law enforcement. So
Okay.
I'm sure they do, because we have an anti-terrorism act. You cannot have an act that you do not have a department in government that deals with it.
Okay.
So yeah, and exactly. And the thing about it is, and I'm sure that they get training, but I have never heard, and I've been in banking for 20 plus years. I'm not going to date myself. I have never heard of anyone from the anti-terrorism unit coming to speak to compliance officers. Never. Come to think of it, that's a very good Baco event to have. Okay. Sorry, side note. Because think about it, they do their thing, right? The banking compliance officers do their thing, but how do we collaborate? How do we connect?
Exactly.
How do we, what you call it, connect the dots? Because obviously the money's coming through the bank, but the acts are being watched or investigated by a separate unit. So yeah, I'm happy about this conversation. I just got a nice training thought. So yeah, it is something that is different. It's unique. It's a specialized area, obviously. And when I think about terrorism financing, I also think about human trafficking, which is also a very specific area. I know that they do have a department that deals with that. And we have had somebody talk about it before. I know somebody that works in that department. But how do you translate the activities, right, into the finances? How does that? Can anybody think about, logically, obviously, because you probably won't have any experience in it, how do you go from trafficking people, right, or smuggling people, to getting that money into the banking or financial system? How do you think that process actually works? And even with terrorism financing and proliferation financing? Well, what do you think is a way or some ways that, because I mean, the whole end point is to make some money. It ain't make no sense doing it if you ain't gonna get no money, right?
Mhm.
And human trafficking is a multi-billion-dollar trade. It's the new slave trade, right?
Right. Right.
I don't think the Haitians think about it a lot, but the smuggling of Haitians in the Bahamas is human trafficking. And I'm just thinking logically, if I am per se a fisherman, I could always claim that the monies that I have is because I sold my, X amount of large quantities of fish. And that could be me just getting payments from the Haitians to smuggle them to and from the Bahamas, or from the Bahamas into the United States of America.
Correct. That is actually one of the main ways that we've seen it in smuggling cases in the Bahamas, because normally cases that I would have read and know about, the people that do the smuggling are usually people that own boats. They are fishermen, right? So like we discussed last week, you can't tell me how much fish I sell. You can't tell me how much fish I caught. I may not have caught any fish, but the reality of it is I have a boat, and a boat is normally on the water. The Bahamas is primarily water. So if you're skilled, you can move in and out of the islands and out of the keys, fishing while smuggling, whatever it is you're smuggling. Not only people, but we're talking about people now. So it is very easy to do that. My question to you is, how does a compliance person spot that through transaction monitoring? How do you think they can determine, hold on, there's a little bit too much money or something ain't right here? Because your profile is going to be with the bank, right? You're going to have a profile with the bank. What did you say, Omar?
Can't hear you. Can't hear you. I can't.
Okay, let me let him come to the computer, because he's going exactly where I wanted us to go.
Okay.
1 sec.
Hi, morning. I was just
Morning.
going as Sands was about to go, and she was saying that, we were saying that when you open your account at the bank, you're going to tell the bank opening documents that you expected to have so many deposits.
I hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay, so when you open your account at the bank, traditionally, not traditionally, nowadays you're going to have to declare to the bank how much you expect to deposit, what kind of balances you expect to see monthly or quarterly or whatever. So here's a fisherman who would have declared that information originally. He said he would expect to see some 2,000, 5,000 a month. But all of a sudden, now he's deposited up to 10, 15,000 a month. That's going to draw a red flag in terms of what's he doing now to cause this change and such an increase in deposits.
What if he accounts for that prior to opening the account, because he knows that he's going to be partaking in a criminal activity?
But if he once he's
So the conversation we're having in class is what happens if he knows that he is going to be doing something illegal and he already accounts for that when he opens up his account. So what if he knows, this is a business I'm dealing with, so I'm going to already account for that? What do you guys think? How do
Well,
you spot that?
I think it's important for those who are on the front line handling the account opening process to have a good understanding of how businesses generally operate and the okay, or what would be considered reasonable in terms of revenue? I've seen a lot of instances of persons trying to open business accounts where what they project to take in annually, it's like 2, 3, 400,000 when it's a home-based business and only starting off with $250. And if if you're saying you're going to make 20 to 30, sometimes 40 or more in monthly income, then you need to be able to substantiate that. Like depending on the type of service they're offering. If it's something that 100 other persons are offering and it's going to be hard for you to get into the market, then why do you think you're going to make all this money? So it's important for those who are handling the requests initially to assess the reasonableness of the potential activity and the annual turnover that's being presented. Because if they get in with, or if they're accepted with a ridiculous amount in annual turnover and monthly potential activity, then when it comes down to the transaction monitoring, the person doing the monitoring will say, well, this is what they declared initially, it's within a potential activity, when in actuality, it should have never been accepted as reasonable in the first place.
Okay, good point, Jensen. So let me challenge you to think further. What if it's a service-based business and not just product-driven? How do you determine reasonableness? Because you can't tell me how much to charge for a service. And there is nothing in terms of data in the Bahamas that pretty much tells you, okay, this is what you're going to pay for this, or this is what you're going to pay for that. So how do we use that same thing that you said for service-based, not only products-based businesses? Because trust me, I know a lot of home-based businesses that make plenty money. Plenty. And I've been banking for 20 plus years. So how do you determine the reasonableness of a service-driven business from account opening process?
Right. Well, I agree with the service-based business. It'll be a little bit more difficult to assess, but at the same time, if it's outside of reason, then it's not, how do I put it? Although it may not be mandatory to require that they present, a detailed financial projections. In some instances, it would be prudent to ask them to present it. And I mean, well, for us personally, we ask from the jump to provide a business plan as well as monthly financial projections. And if the amount is unreasonable based on your understanding of the industry that person is in, then for example, if they said they were in business for 2 to 3 years, okay, well, you need to provide us with financial statements for us to be able to look at and assess the revenue that you've been taking in to see if this is in line with what you're declaring. If it's a very new business, that would be a little bit more difficult because obviously there's no data. But at the same time, you just have to ask the right questions and just like I say, make an assessment as to whether or not this is reasonable, and if need be, get additional information. But
Okay.
it's a tricky situation. But if you're properly trained to look at it from a money laundering perspective, then it'll be more difficult for someone to come in under false pretenses. Not impossible, but more difficult.
Agreed. And I was about to challenge you just now, but you went exactly where I wanted you to go. There's a question in the room, so give me a sec. No. CIBC, if you open up any banking account with them, they individual, and that's a part of their opening process. Now for companies, they might ask you for the not for IBCs, but if the retail bank, you're talking about private banking. No, so yeah, this is retail. He's referring to retail banking. So Jensen, you went exactly where I wanted you to go, because the thing about it is it all boils down to us, right? Us frontline workers who have to be sufficiently trained to know or suspect that this ain't adding up. Because there's no school that's going to tell you and teach you reasonableness, right? This is specific training. Okay, see, somebody has raised their hand. Jeffy?
Hi, yes.
I have a question for you
Mhm.
because I know personally the way that I approach things, I like to look at things, my background more of an analytical sense. Do we not take into perspective like the market value of certain like goods and services when we're making these decisions? Even if a service isn't so much prominently available in the Bahamas, that service still has a reasonable market value that we would place on that service. And we all know that the first 3 to 5 years in a business, if they make it through the initial year, that's going to be the make or break period. That's usually the period that businesses tend to not so much struggle, but you're trying to strive and put yourself out there. So for me, in a service-based business, if the market value for that business is, say, I don't know, the average internationally is maybe 100K income, for you to come to me and open your account and say that your expected value of income in that initial year, you're basing it on 300K, that's going to set off red flags in my mind. Because I'm thinking like, what are you doing? What are you expecting? Even if you're like thinking about inflation or, oh, that service isn't so much available in the Bahamas. What else are you doing that you're projecting yourself in your initial years of business to make this much money? Is that something that we would like look at I guess, that perspective of things?
You can. And Jeffrey, may I ask, where do you work? Or industry? You don't have to say the place. Industry?
Mostly in statistics, actuarial, like that kind of thing.
Okay, so Jeffrey, let me challenge you to think about it this way. I'm a consultant, right? But I also have a day job, right?
Mm-hmm.
There is no data for what I do in the Bahamas. I can guarantee you that because I charge an hourly rate. I also teach. Obviously, my bank would know all of this because I tell them all of the things that I do, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you think about the financial services industry, we get 1 million consultants these days. I asking you, right? So for me, it's like, you can't tell me I can only charge $10 an hour when after 20 plus years of experience, I won't charge $300 an hour. We know attorneys is charged up to $800, up to $1,000 an hour, right? So in that regard, it is a very wide gamut when it relates to services. And what are you going to use? You're going to use the US as a benchmark? Like, where would you get the data from, right? To support what you think should be reasonable as it relates. I'm just saying consultant in any area, because we get consultants in every area in this country. So for me, you are correct in saying you should be able to use, but when it comes to services, it's not always that easy to find that information out because nobody's going to put out there how much a consultant charges for whatever it is that they're doing, especially in financial services. If you're in financial services, I can tell you the money that attorneys and accountants and compliance people rack up is mind-blowing to the average person. It's mind-blowing. You will not believe how much they charge an hour.
So my question for you is, how would we then, I guess, weed out the businesses that do have potential for trafficking or laundering or any of these things, if we're just, allowed to let them say, well, I'm going to make this amount? And is it something that we just accept, or what do we put in place in order to weed these people out?
Well, like
in a practical, everyday, sense of the way.
At the beginning of the relationship, you try to understand where your client head is and what they're about to do, right? If it's a new business. If it's an existing business, you try to get them to tell you more about what has happened since the inception of the business. And then you use transaction monitoring as your tool to fight off any red flags. That's the only thing you can do. So it's a process. It's from the beginning, as Jensen said, and as, during your relationship as a customer. You have to rely and depend on monitoring. You have to rely and depend on what you hear out there. It's the Bahamas. You all know
right.
A lot of things are spoken, right? You have to depend and rely on your compliance professional to be nosy. Like my kids tell me, Mom, you nosy, boy. I be on all my clients' Facebook and Instagram. If you leave your page open for me, it's fair game, sweetie.
Okay.
Right? So you have to have that training to know that that is something that you should be doing, right? I know
Right.
when I worked on a project for one of my clients, it was to determine like the US nexus of clients. Clients think, oh, because, you know, I live in the US, I this, I that. But I was able to determine a client's US nexus from their Instagram page. Because the Instagram will tell you when it posted. And, you know, be like, say, oh, hey, a current situation, blah, 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 right? So they
Right.
posted, you've been in the US for months. So I was able to add up using the IRS formula that you have exceeded the time required according to the IRS to make you a US person. And I can tell you, the CEO was blown away because he was like, oh, this client keeps saying they're not US, whatever, whatever. They just going there on vacation. But you have accountants, you have attorneys. They didn't tell you about that one little small rule, that physical presence rule. So it all boils down to training and experience. To be honest with you, a lot of the things I know now, I've learned along the way, because there is no school that's going to teach you how to find and spot someone who is laundering money through terrorism financing, through human smuggling. You know, back in the day, drug thing was the big thing in the Bahamas. Okay, it was obvious because people were just flaunting. You know how much drug dealers, still drug dealers, and nobody knows drug dealers? You just, if you know how to play the game, right? You mix, right? You commingle and you stay under the radar. Is the small fries would have all the mouth. They don't all the talking. And so that's another thing you have to do, keep your ear to the ground, especially in retail banking. In private banking, it's a little more difficult to do. But when you search in based on the SCB and central bank rules, you have to search your data every so often anyway. So negative news stories about your clients, if they appear, then it's your job to continue to look to see what is going on. I've had a client in the past, he literally had contracts to develop biometric material for different armies. I was uncomfortable with the fact that he was, of course, the bank's client. And for me, even though his contracts were on file, when he wanted to transfer, there's an additional $20 million in the pool somewhere. And I was like, I ain't having it. Because for me, I assumed that that was his time to add in all his other side things. Who else he's selling these biometric and other things too, right? Because as long as he was with this one bank, the bank I was working for was the bank that he wanted to transfer the funds to. But there was a $20 million imbalance. This is what you had in this bank. This is what you bring in. Where does the extra $20 million come from? Oh, but I have these large contracts. Oh, yes, you do. But something ain't right here. Yes, we do. Generally, a bank, you can request the contracts, and you can withhold the money until they provide it, or you could send it back to the sender. The bank has the right to deny the money. If you won't be difficult and say, oh, that's that in your business and why you need to know, all the bank is doing is return it. One press of a button, return funds. So yeah, you just have to be trained to see, trained to detect, trained to know. You have to have an investigative mind, because trust me, the criminals out there thinking all the time. And they also attend the same training that compliance professional trains, because organized crime syndicates have people on staff to know what you know and to know more than you know, to do what you do and to do it better. Now, we don't think about this because we're in the Bahamas, but on an international scale, it's very important. They have the best lawyers, the best compliance people, the best accountants. They hire people to ensure that their empire stays intact. Yes? So when you think about smuggling, people, drugs, guns, all of those things, you have to think outside of the average oh, you know, this retail banking situation, they dabble in here and there, or whatever it is. You got to think wider than that. You have to expand your horizon. This role, this job is not for the faint of heart. It's not for people who scary. See me, I can push the envelope. I mean, you push back, I can push back harder. Because for me, it's my name, right? And as compliance professionals, especially if you're the money laundering reporting officer, is personal liability attached. Like I always tell my students, I like silver. Pandora, Tiffany, David Yerman. I don't want nothing with cuffs. Because I ain't trying to go to jail. Right? So it's all about training and being able to think outside of the box, using Jaffe, I may add, analytical data if it's available. Yes?
Okay. Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
You're welcome. So it talks about measures relating to charities. We're gonna talk through this because chapter 6 is pretty much all non-Bahamas. So we're just gonna talk through it, okay? The US Patriot Act, and I told you all before about the extraterritorial powers. When you look at this section 2, you can see all of the things that can happen under the US Patriot Act. It's mind-blowing that they can go into other countries and do all of these things. However, anytime you're touching, dealing with the US dollar, you have to recognize that they take full control over anybody, anything, any event, any purchase that is made with their currency. Yes, and that's how come they're able to actually enforce these things, because it's the US dollar. Now, obviously, if the funds aren't US dollar, it won't apply for the most part, because where's the crime as it relates to the specific act? The jurisdiction won't actually even matter for them as long as it's the US dollar. Yeah. So just be aware of all of the powers that are conferred on the super countries as it relates to their currency. Section 3 speaks to the EU strategy on terrorism financing. A lot of these things you would know just generally, right? When we talked about nonprofits before, we talked about their approach. They have agreements in place. There's a terrorist list. I don't know if we'll talk about it because sanctions is actually in this as well. For those of us that work in financial services, we would be familiar with, there's a sanctions regime in the Bahamas, and the reporting to the regulators on a quarterly basis and then on an annual basis as it relates to sanctions, a sanctions list that is sent out by the UN. The UK also have their own strategy, terrorism, financing of terrorism strategy. And you can read through this. Obviously, it won't affect the Bahamas as it relates to our laws, because I think we should have our own strategy, but it's not going to be in the book, right? It also speaks about who is responsible for implementing the UK strategy. They have a whole, I think it was Mr. Ferguson that talked about who's responsible in the Bahamas. Well, this is who's responsible in the UK.
Mhm.
Hmm? Huh? And, oh, well, the Treasury also, because it deals with the money, right? And then the actual department or team.
I count 8.
Pardon?
I counted 8.
Yeah, because they have, in my opinion, they have a very robust strategy. They need to have a very robust strategy because of their location and their position globally, right? London is the world's largest global financial market. So if you have something like that, you know that to hurt you, the possibility is greater right? Certain countries, not that terrorism can't happen everywhere, but what's the end result if you have a terrorist attack, let's just say, I don't know which country, on a small country as opposed to a large city like London? You know what I mean? The effect is so much greater. So they obviously have to have a very robust strategy. As a matter of fact, the city of London has a robust strategy as it relates to crime, period, because that's a city that is predominantly covered by closed circuit TV. There's a camera everywhere in the city of London. All of the buses, all of the taxis, everybody have a camera. They can follow you from even underground. Very, very, very robust security measures in place. They have their legislation in place as well. You know, we have the ATA. Obviously, it works in conjunction with all of the other laws, right? And they have their own definition of terrorism. Every country in their act defines what they consider to be terrorism. So did anybody look up what is terrorism in the Bahamas? What does the act say? Somebody look it up for us now. The ATA. What does ATA define terrorism as? Jarrell, you looking? Because you normally are. Jarrell is our resident assistant. Does anybody want to give it a guess? Or define it based on what you know? Let's not all speak at once.
Which definition are you looking for according to the act of terrorism or the
Yes.
terrorist organization?
Terrorism, and then if you want, you could tell us a terrorist organization as well.
All right, so a terrorist is any person who commits a terrorist activity by any means, directly, indirectly, lawfully, or willingly, unlawfully, and unwillfully. And I have to read the whole thing.
For the benefit of the class, I would appreciate it.
Okay, so let's
It's
go.
from the ATA.
Pardon me?
Are you reading this from the ATA? Anti-Terrorism Act of the Bahamas?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I'm reading from the, so everyone can know, the Anti-Terrorism Act 2008.
18?
18, sorry, 2018.
Okay.
All right. And I am going to go on page 8, which has the definition of a terrorist, terrorist act, terrorist organization, and terrorist property.
Okay.
All right. So a terrorist includes a person who commits a terrorist act by any means, directly or indirectly, unlawfully, and willfully. Participates as an accomplice in terrorist acts for the financing of terrorism, organizes or directs others to commit terrorist acts or the financing of terrorism, or contributes to the commission of terrorist acts or the financing of terrorism by an individual or a group of persons acting with a common purpose, where the contribution is made intentionally with the aim of furthering the terroristic act or the financing of terrorism, or with the knowledge of this intention of the individual or group of persons to commit the terrorist act or the financing of terrorism. So now we're going to go into what is a terrorist act. All right? A terrorist act means any act which constitutes an offense under this part, which is terrorist organization, group, or entity, which means a legal entity or group of terrorists that commits a terrorist act by any means, directly or indirectly, unlawfully, and willfully. Participates as an accomplice in terrorist acts or the financing of terrorism, organizes or directs others to commit terrorist acts or the financing of terrorism, or contributes to the commission of terrorist acts or the financing of terrorism by an individual or group of persons acting with a common purpose where the contribution is made intentionally and with the aim of furthering the terrorist act or the financing of terrorism with the knowledge of the intention of the group to commit the terrorist act or the financing of terrorism. And terrorist property is the proceeds from the commission of a terrorist act and property which has been, is being, or is intended to be used to commit a terrorist act. Property which has been and is being, or is being intended to be used by terrorist organizations, property owned or controlled by, on behalf of a terrorist organization, or property which has been collected for the purpose of providing support to a terrorist organization or funding of a terrorist act. That's it.
Jaffe, before you leave that, go to the penalties for me, please.
Yes, I have it marked. Give me 1 second, okay? Well, I remember it. I remember that it is $25 million and 25 years. I'm gonna find, I have it right. 30. All right. Penalties. A person who commits an offense under this section is liable on conviction to imprisonment or to imprisonment and fine not exceeding $5 million when no penalty is otherwise presented. Liability of a legal entity. Where an offense required to under sections 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 to this part is committed, a person responsible for the management or control of an entity located or registered in the Bahamas or in any other way organized under the laws of the Bahamas, that entity in circumstances where this person committed the offense while acting in that capacity commits an offense and is liable on conviction on information to a fine of $25 million, notwithstanding any criminal liability that may have been incurred by an individual that was directly involved in the commission of the offense, or any civil or administrative sanction which may have been or may be capable of being imposed by law. Now, let's see where I found the 25 years.
Now, I know which one of y'all have $25 million to pay the government, but it ain't me.
There's also a section on property freezing.
Right. I think the 25 years relates to directors of companies.
Yeah, the directors of the companies. I'm trying to find that part. Oh, yeah, that was right after. Sorry. That's for the liability of a director or manager. And then there's another liability for the legal entity. So the previous one was the legal entity. And for those who don't know, I'm reading from page 30. And that is number 41. So I guess you can use 40 to 42. Those would be your penalties. And for the liability of the legal entity and liability of a director and manager.
Thank you, Jaffe. Y'all see how stiff those penalties are?
Yeah.
Pogo don't even have those kinds of penalties attached.
Yes, we see it. Yes.
So please don't allow your clients to use their entities in your institutions to do no garbage. Because a lot of times, you know, as employees, especially in the international financial world, employees are directors, right? Right. Yes? Right. For those of you who are not in financial services arena, most times when you have nominee companies, IBCs and trusts, the employees of the companies are the nominee directors. So you're John Henry, on that wire transfer instruction, could lead you to jail. So if you are uncomfortable about something in your capacity as a nominee director, please say so. Don't just sign it because, oh, I'm a bank signatory, I'm an authorized signatory. And for some people, that's a big deal, right? But for me, you don't gotta give me no name. Because at the end of the day, I believe it's all about you have to protect your own self. You just can't leave it up to anybody to say, oh, well, sign this because you're authorized signatory. No, because if you're not comfortable with the transaction that the client is going to make, because most times clients ain't gonna make these things in their own name. They're going to use their legal entity, their legal vehicles. Yes? So I'm getting a feedback. Aurelia, mic on. At the end of the day, you have to say, what is this transaction about and why? There's a question in the room. Give me a moment.
When you refer to being uncomfortable, most times, yes, you are a director of the company that you work for also has directors. And you're saying, okay, I'm uncomfortable with the transaction. I'm requiring more information from the client in order to move ahead. And you have someone, quote unquote, above you that is saying, no, that looks okay to me. Go ahead. Or, but this is your reporting officer. This is who you're reporting to. Where does that mean?
She's asking, I don't know if you guys heard, if you're a nominee director, and you're being asked to sign a transaction or an instruction, sorry, that you're uncomfortable with, and this is your superior asking you or telling you, oh, it's okay, sign, you can sign it. Me personally, caveat, this my personal, opinion, this is me. I ain't fitting to sign it. You could fire me. Because at the end of the day, honestly, if you think about your liability, does the company's indemnity insurance cover you? Probably not. It probably covers your superior. So you should know where you stand as it relates to being a director as a nominee director on any account for any institution. And you should also know where you stand as it relates to the insurance indemnity of the institution. Because if you think about a $5 million fine, insurance indemnity is going to cover some of that, depending on what it is. But are you covered under the insurance indemnity? And I know while I was president of ABACO, we were trying to get insurance coverage for compliance officers. From an indemnity perspective, it's been very difficult getting that off the ground because most institutions won't allow their compliance officers to be covered outside of their institution by another insurance indemnity. So we were trying to see how we can get it, like you buy it personally for yourself. But if you're acting in the capacity as an employee, it's challenging, right? So you have to ensure that when you put your John Henry on something, all of the ducks are lining up. Because if your superior says to you, I'm not, it's okay, go ahead and sign, and you sign, and your superior name isn't there, if something happens, what you think will happen?
Fareda, in our area, the central bank is our regulator. That's one of the requirements now that the central bank asks for each year. The professional indemnity insurance, and it looks for certain aspects of the insurance to make sure directors are covered. So that's a regulated
directors of the institution, Angela.
Right, exactly.
Not nominee directors. No. I just did a governance training from the central bank's policies last week. Not nominee directors. Directors of the institution itself. So you may be a director because you're at that senior level, but you have a trust officer who's an authorized signatory on your nominee companies. They are not covered. And the central bank isn't asking for that information about them either. But when you think about it, they are directors on IBCs. They're not
Yeah,
a director on the firm itself, but they're director on IBCs, and it still stands, because remember now, the ATA is specific. It's about the entity level. So they weren't just coming for the financial institution. They're coming for the company under which the transaction was performed. Does the central bank require a certain amount, Angela, of how much you should have in insurance? I know I'm an SCB registrant as well. And so they tell us it should be risk-based based on our institution. Does the central bank have a specific value amount, Angela, as it
No,
relates?
No, it doesn't have a specific value, but for our insurance, there is a specific value on the insurance. But
Right.
the central bank doesn't I don't know per se, but I know they've been asking for it. And they ask, they look for certain aspects in the professional indemnity insurance.
I know SCB asks for it every year. When you submit your annual audit, you have to submit your indemnity insurance.
Sure. Central bank now is requiring it.
Yeah. So as compliance professionals, as professionals, period, if you're going to work in financial services in this area, please ensure that you work in an institution and you should have their best interest at heart, but self-preservation is the best preservation. Yes, because it's very easy for you to get fired. It's the stroke of a pen. Institutions carry on smartly, right? They replace you. And then in this country, us, we blackballed certain times because, that was the person connected to whatever. Nobody really knows the story that you just was signing because you were told to sign, right?
So
the reality of it is there's a process, but what you're going to have to go through, because it's going to be the institution against you, right? I know for a fact that same transaction that I told you guys with the client with the $20 million, I lost my job over it. And I was fine with that. But I can tell you a couple of years later, when it was picked up during a central bank inspection, the bank caught hell. But I was glad. But I knew the compliance person there then, and she called. She's like, "You remember this? You remember that? Is Karen on board with you for it?" I was like, "Yeah." She said, "Girl, we are in hot water." Obviously, she shouldn't be telling me that, right? But she told it to me because, as far as she was concerned, you've been saying this from Jump Street. And the client actually got arrested upon landing in a specific country.
When you in a position where, okay, say, because of penalties and all, who was willing to take that chance? Personal identity. Where does it leave someone who is not as bold as you are to say, okay, well, that's it. I can walk on this. Where as a compliance officer or whichever one you serve under, you can be held too high. Like how you had your questions or concerns. Would that have served you anything?
I could have gone to the central bank, honestly, because I was in the MLRO at that point. I was the compliance manager. But I chose not to go to the central bank because for me personally, this is me personally, I'm a Christian. So I said to myself, God, I am fine with losing my job because of my integrity and because of my ethical stance. I'm okay with it, right? However, when it happened, I was advised, my attorney was like, go to the central bank, let's sue them, right? Wrongful dismissal, you doing your job. For me, I wasn't interested in doing all of that. But as an MLRO, you could seek guidance, but obviously you're working for the people. You do what they tell you to do or you leave, right? Generally speaking. So for me, it didn't happen right away, It happened, I was presented with that case early on in my employment, and it took them a couple of months. First, they didn't renew I didn't get off probation. Okay. They couldn't say why. Then probation came and gone by 6 months. Nobody said nothing, but I was never confirmed, right? So technically, even if you don't give me a letter to confirm me, as long as you keep paying me, in essence, I'm confirmed, right? Exactly. So watch this, they waited until 9 months. And then you call me and you said, oh, it's not because of your work, but we no longer require your services. I knew what it was because obviously that was a huge client, right? So for me, it was like, okay, thank you. Let's go our separate ways. And I'm sure they thought, because I'm very bold, right? They thought I was going to go to the central bank. I didn't. I could have, because I was going to be well within my rights to go and report them, because you can make reports to the central bank, right? I didn't. 3 months after I got terminated, the managing director got terminated, right? And for me, mine was quietly, at the end of the day, whatever, thanks for your service, whatever. She got fired in a staff meeting. I ain't gonna lie, it was like, okay, I can watch how all of this is going to unfold. And it was because of decisions that she's made with clients just like that. It can't be all about the money. You have to be able to protect the institution. And it was a conservative institution. So at the end of the day, it was like, hold on, wait. Why the compliance officer get let go? You still here and you sign off. Because I didn't sign off. I'm that type of person. I said, listen, you can make an executive decision, which you will have to make, because I am not prepared to sign. She did. So I may have lost my job before her, but she lost hers after me, right? And I'm okay with that. But if you're not okay with that, you have to find something else to do.
Ms. Sands, question. And I'm not being nosy, I'm just really curious. Would they pay somebody like you when you got fired? Would you get money for that? I know you were only there for 9 months. What about this other lady? Would she have gotten paid out? Because if they really...
I'm sure they paid her out, right? Because of course she's the managing director. She would have gotten paid out. But you get paid out, you can't go back to your home country. You have to go someplace else. For me, for her, it was a sheer embarrassment. For me, it didn't matter because nobody knew. People only...
She was a foreign person. Okay.
Yeah, well, most of these banks, these banks are headed by foreign people, right? They bring their people in, which is fine. So it's all about, you're going to come to it. I don't know if you're going to come to it in this, but in AML, but you're going to definitely come to it in GRC. Ethics is huge for me. Integrity is huge for me. So at the end of the day, if you cannot make ethical decisions or stand on your integrity, this is not the profession for you, because you will be asked to do things. I'm asking you, you will be asked to do things that goes against your ethical beliefs. And you just have to say, all institutions generally have a policy as it relates to integrity and ethics. Read it. If I read nothing else, I just read that. Because I won't be able to quote to you when you come to me sideways to say, hold on, the bank or the institution states in its policy X, Y, and Z. Now, if you're asking me to breach the bank's policy, give me that in writing. Yes? This is
right,
the you're going to need if you're going to be effective in this industry. I mean, and for me, I try to fly under the radar, but people know, okay, if you want somebody who's going to do your job and do it right, you could call Fareda. Because I ain't scared. I mean, what's the worst you could do? I've gotten fired twice in my life. So for me, thing. And both times was based on decisions I made to be ethical. Life happens. That's what I chalk it up to experience. You were going to say something, Sam?
Yeah, you probably already answered this, and I probably already know the answer, but I'll ask anyway. What, if any, specific legal protections are there for the MLRO and or any industry, compliance industry association protections that may exist that can help the MLRO in such situations?
Okay, so as a former president of BACO, there's nothing specific. You can, however, go to your regulator And I know I personally have spoken to the Attorney General on this matter on several occasions because I've had several of my MLROs fired. Obviously, as it relates to filing STRs that senior management didn't want them to file or whatever it was. And in all of the cases, they won their cases. One of them took the bank to court and won. The other people, the bank just decided to pay them out so they could keep the story, you know, kind of hush hush. But usually your best defense is to make sure you have all your I's dotted and T's crossed. And if you were to get fired, know why and be able to defend your position. And if you can do that, I can tell you most institutions, they don't want the negative reputational risk associated with you firing your compliance person because they were doing the job you hired them to do. But in terms of protections, there are none. Until we get a whistleblower act in this country, there will be none, because that's what we need. And I think Central Bank is actually working on that, because then you will have protection under the Whistleblower Act.
Okay, because there just seems to be a general, I don't know, no one seems to want to take that step in detecting the MLROs from what I could see. So
No, the AG is open to doing some things, but he can't do anything out that's not in law. And this is why we've been pushing, trying to get a whistleblowing act going. Because he can't do anything if it's not coded in law. But he is aware of the issues that MLROs face. So because obviously it would be his prosecution department, because prosecution comes under him, right? That'll have to deal with these types of matters. So he's aware of it, and they try to work along with BACO as it relates to protecting MLROs as best as they can. The central bank has also put in an annual talk time with MLROs. So you can actually, you have, as SO1s and SO2s do and accountants do, you have talk time with the central bank where they can ask you anything, or you can declare anything. So that would be an opportunity for the compliance officers to say what they think they should say, what they need to say. But just be aware, if you do so, the possibility exists for you to get terminated. So you have to decide, you know, is it worth me saying something about it, or let me keep my job because I have a mortgage and they're children in private school.
Do we have any examples of local companies that have been convicted under this act?
ATA? No.
And before we go any further, I did have a question about like indemnity insurance. So the directors that are covered, so if they are convicted, the insurance would pay the fine?
Not all of it. The insurance pays some of your legal fees. And the company decides what they can do with paying the fines. Yeah. The question was if the indemnity insurance that covers directors pay everything. Generally speaking, they would help you with your legal fees, but if you're convicted, you're on your own. They will help you with the legal fees, but if you get convicted, I mean, a company can't do anything if you get convicted, you're going to jail. Companies don't go to jail. People do. So, yes, we're way off what the book is saying, but we're talking about anti-terrorism in the Bahamas, and so I'm comfortable with that. If you look at in 5, you will see the materials and the cost of terrorist acts. It don't cost that much money to disrupt a whole country. Yes. It also talks about how terrorism is financed. I think we talked about this last week in some detail. Yes. Y'all remember our conversation last week about how they use what they use? Talk to me.
Yes.
Right. So we were kind of ahead of the curve with that. So you can look to see the financing of terrorism, how terrorism is financed, but we talked about how it is financed for the most part. And obviously Charities is number 1, right? and all legitimate businesses, because remember, the difference between money laundering and terrorist financing is, remember we said it doesn't necessarily always have to be illegal money. Legal money is finance terrorism. And this is why the Bahamas now has the NPO Act, because under FATF, this is a huge deal. Yes? I remember we were talking about that last week as well. This is why charities now have to have some type of reporting regime in place in order to ensure that we're compliant with that FATF recommendation.
Is that type of music why I don't know the subject, but I heard something about them also now requiring some form of reporting from churches.
Yeah, they come under charities. They come under charities. Because I think we were here last week? Okay. Okay. Okay, so we have Alma in class today. Alma is a new student, so she would not have heard all of our conversation last week. So she's asking about, is it why churches are now being asked to report on their finances? And last week we had a huge discussion about anybody can put money in church. That's my tithes, that's my seed, that's my offering, that's my whatever. Nobody asks you when you go to the offering plate, where the money come from? No. Right? And think about it, a lot of it is cash. Very few people, except, people that I guess are members, would write checks monthly, but most offering is cash. And now with the pandemic, online. We just give it online because we ain't got a church. Well, most people haven't gone back to a building, right? So even that, for me, takes the risk up, because at first they could have just dropped that cash in there and they cool with that. But you getting online giving from anywhere, it's very easy. Put in your credit card, your debit card, your whatever, click, 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 submit. Now, I don't see how you could wash the money in a church offering, but in this country, we know a lot of these churches are family-led and family-run. So I'm not casting aspersions on anybody, but if my uncle is the pastor and I deal drugs and I want that little thing clean, I put that in there. I tell him I'm putting it in there, and I ask him to write me a check from the church, because the church account is a legal account, right? Now, you can't tell me what to do with church money because they don't tell us how they just run the money, right? And they ain't getting no invoices for this or for that or for whatever. We blessing this one, we giving this one a house, we buying this one a car. It happens. That's the reality in our country, right? So you have to ensure that, okay, this may be a charity as per the law. How is the finances being run? Because if my uncle cool, like slide him one little 5% of that, my little tithes to him, he can clean that money for me very easily. Very, very, very easily. And that's just how charities work. Y'all remember the big fiasco with the Hands for Hunger money? No, nobody has, I don't even know if it's concluded. Has anybody heard about the Hands for Hunger? It was in the public domain, so we can discuss it. The Hands for Hunger charity in the Bahamas.
Never heard about the fiasco. I know the organization.
Sorry, it's not Hands for Hunger. It was Head Nose.
Head Nose, yeah. During Hurricane Dorian, eh? Yeah, during Hurricane Dorian.
Right after Hurricane Dorian.
Yeah, I heard about that.
You've heard about it?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Right. You see how charities could go awry? Very good intent, right?
Yeah.
How many of you knew that you cannot have a GoFundMe account unless you're a US person? You shouldn't.
Shouldn't.
Right. That didn't come to light. You shouldn't. That's your homework. I ain't telling you all. That's your homework. It's actually illegal. to have a GoFundMe account outside of the US dollar? No, not we. Not we, sweetie.
Just as
Read the ATA.
yeah, okay. That's just it.
Read the ATA. Are you a US person? Is your US account legitimate, or are you like the regular payments like us? Were you a US? Were you a student in the United States? Okay, fine. Did you close your account in there? No. Okay, why?
Because I mean.
Right. Right. No, you don't tell me why. I'm just causing you to think. Right? You can be of a US account. You can be considered a US person.
I pay taxes.
It's fine.
Okay, and then that would make it legal. So if I file my taxes every year, that would.
You can do it. Yeah.
Okay.
Because a lot of times students.
The taxes based on just the funds within that account.
No, sweetie, you file, US people file their taxes on their assets globally.
So I need to file it on my income.
Everything, your income everywhere. Some people, when they finish school, obviously, they keep their accounts, right? Nobody really checks for it because obviously, I don't know how large it is or whatever it is, but they knew, okay, you had your whatever visa, whatever. So it was opened legitimately, right? And most people know the US isn't so stringent because sometimes you go back there to work and live. So it's no big deal generally until something goes wrong. You know what I mean? Things just lie dormant until something goes wrong.
So if I was to become a compliant, anyway,
Oh,
should
so
anyway,
good.
not already. Oh.
You should have to do,
Oh, declare.
depending on who you work for.
Okay.
I wouldn't say that, but some companies ask you to declare it. So if you act ignorant, you in essence lie.
Right.
Yeah, so it depends. So the charity it's a very sticky situation. It's an interesting case. I have not heard a conclusion, but y'all go read it up. Go follow it. Because a lot came out of that case. A lot of information that most people won't know about. But we were just giving because, you know, everybody was affected by Dorian. And so, but if you think about it, if they were using the money and they were not, so I'm just saying, if anybody was using the money to fund terrorism, you take that money with your bank account, eh? In the Bahamas? You use your debit card attached to your bank account? Right, and they can trace it back to you? Great. Be careful where you send your money, people. ATA. Yes? Huh? Yeah, ATA 2018. Moving terrorist funds, you can see how they move their funds and how they obviously get funded, right? Anybody have any questions so far? We're getting to international trade. I think this is where Sam wanted us to be. Diamond trade. Has anybody heard about black diamonds?
Nope.
Okay, that's your homework then, Mr. Ferguson. It's a huge deal.
Black diamond?
Yes. So if you look in 6.3 as it speaks to international trade, you can see 6.3.1 talks about use of the diamond trade for terrorism financing. You always watch the movies where they like, you could carry a bag of diamonds across any border in your purse. Think about, right? What will stop you now? If you're on my bag, who tell you? Oh, who tell you that ain't cubic zirconia? Think about it. When you're doing decorative things, like for me, if I have an event, I buy them little crystal things off Amazon. You just spread on the table and stuff. You then. Like, I don't know if they're trained to spot diamonds, but if you have 1 or 2 diamonds, loose diamonds, that is, nobody in your purse, nobody can tell you that's diamonds. How they can know? And you know a diamond is very expensive, depending on the cut and clarity and all of that. right? So how are they going to know? I could carry a diamond in my bag from here to wherever I go in. Drop the diamond off, person meet me in the hotel. I give that to them. I move cash. I move cash at all. So I break no law. Right? Because it talks about the traveler's currency declaration act talks about $10,000 or more. That one, a carat diamond on the open market sells anywhere from $8,000 to $12,000.
Are the black diamonds same as a blood diamond?
Yes.
I was just going to ask, is it a blood diamond or a black diamond? Because I've heard of blood diamonds before, but I never heard of black diamond.
It's blood diamond, sorry. The African thing.
Yes.
Yeah. I know about blood diamonds.
Blood diamonds, I'm sorry, blood diamonds. So that's a big deal as it relates to international trade finance and as it relates to financing terrorism. You don't need no money. And how traceable is it? Let's be honest. How traceable is it? Right? The financing of weapons proliferation. So this is what Sam was talking about. So how do we know? How are we going to know, Sam? And I'm saying Sam because that's what comes up in your, I know it's your initial. That's what comes up in your, as your name.
No problem. According to what I read, that there's supposed to be certain grades of materials.
Raw material.
Raw materials that would say whether it could be used in nuclear weapons and weapons proliferation, as opposed to the standard everyday use that the dual-use goods are made for. So I know in the reading in here, there are entities within Europe and the UK that have these under user control. So I guess the ones that are for the weapons, they're supposed to be underneath those organizations. And I guess if those raw materials are being transported, that'll be easily detected by those organizations that would look at the grading system. But like I said, if it comes into the regular financial services industry, it may be more difficult to spot, if I'm making any sense.
And what about those home-based terrorist groups? I mean, they use everyday items to make bombs. Yes?
Yeah, that is really more difficult. I guess you have to look. I mean, that's really difficult because even if you are, let's say you are not pharmaceutical, I'm sorry, let's say you're industrial, like that Blanco bleach.
Right.
They have legitimate needs to get certain chemicals.
Right.
To make the ammonias and the bleaches and all those detergents. So how do you know when Blanco is perhaps ordering more supply than it needs for its normal? If they give out 10,000, produce 10,000 cases of bleach every year, and then they go up to 15 or 20, how do you say, okay, well, this is outside of what you're doing?
Pandemic. We say the pandemic. That's why the things coming up.
Exactly. So unless you have a pandemic or hurricane that is not used for more cleanings, you have to be able to, I guess, spot those. Yes, that's in the case where we're talking about the using of the fisheries and illegal immigrants. If you say that you are a spiny lobster fisherman, that's closed season. So if you have funds on any excess of what you have during the regular season as a closed season, and maybe that can give you some type of, okay, this is where we need to pause and look because the season is closed. How are you moving 50,000 pounds of spiny lobster according to your invoices when during the best of the height of the season, you only move in 20 pounds?
Because I do in Boston, Maine lobsters.
Unless you're exporting. But if you don't have an export license, then what would you doing with that excess?
What about if you're importing? I just said Boston, Maine lobsters.
Importing? Well, I was thinking from an exporter's point of view. Okay.
I'm just saying because fishermen can actually buy things outside and bring it here to sell.
True enough. I guess
I'm
the
just trying.
deeper that, yeah.
I just try to challenge you guys to think on the opposite side, right? Because you're thinking as a legitimate person.
Mhm.
The criminal isn't.
True.
Is there anything under the law where you can check? Like,
I always check.
I mean, not check the invoice or check the
company.
invoice.
You do background checks on the company. So for me, when my clients' transactions don't make sense, and when I say my clients, obviously there'd be clients of the banks that hire me. I check, and I have found during the pandemic last year that these clients was lying because ain't no company in that name, or if the company in that name, it ain't doing whatever.
Right. So, yes.
So you check it.
Sometimes that's me. What I'm saying, let's say it is a legitimate company. Let's say it is in the business, that client please. But is there any way for us to prove that the client is a client of our company?
No, because you can't call the company and
No,
ask the
you
company.
can't.
You just gotta go by what they say. But then you will know. And you should, if you're specifically trained. No, you can't, because first of all, you're in the Bahamas. So if you're calling outside of the Bahamas to get information, we have a.
You can call them after you were gone out.
If you act in, you're already committing a crime. That's what I'm saying. I was going to say that if you're sufficiently trained, right, you should know, and you should be able to see. Okay, does this make sense? Most, if you're dealing with US, they have their their numbers on it, right? Their tax identification numbers and things like that on it. Because obviously if they're exporting, that's something that they're going to have to tell the IRS, right? So you look for little things like that to say, hold on, this ain't have no 10. And then you go and you Google it, right? And then you go back and you say to the client, you ask questions. Because if they lying, sorry, right? Somehow they can slip up. But you can't call the company to find out, because then you would be breaching their confidentiality. Because for you to call from the bank to say, does this client, first of all, how they know you're admitting that that client is your client? That's the first thing. You're not permitted to do that. By Bahamian law, you can't disclose that I'm a client of the bank. So by calling you, whether I tricking you, faking you, whatever it is, I myself as a compliance person would have just breached our own laws, right? So there's actually no way to know per se, but like Jensen said, you have to be trained and you have to use your gut. A lot of times we take that gut feeling, be like, oh, well, I sure. If you uneasy about something, question it. Because I know we've had clients, a lot of times we're buying directly now from China, right? And you trying to figure out, this ain't making sense. Exactly. So you have to be able to continue to ask your client, yes, we know that this is your money, but we're not comfortable sending it directly to this Chinese company. How would we send it to your account someplace else? You send it to them. And then what's their reaction? Because obviously if it's an IBC, right? It's coming from an IBC. It kind of shields their identity. So they can kind of do whatever. But if you say, no, you have a personal account, we will send it to your personal account because the bank is not comfortable with sending it directly. What's the reaction? That's what I did. Y'all want to send this money? Listen, I told my clients, send it to their personal account. All of a sudden, the payment request gets withdrawn.
But let me ask you something. You say to a client that the bank is not comfortable.
They can say compliance, so it don't matter.
The client is not comfortable with the payment. Issuing the payment. Sometimes they push back on that.
Yeah.
Sometimes they push back.
I do, and when they push back, then you say to them, we want to be as helpful as possible, right? let us send this money. This ain't your only bank account because you want to fund this account from somewhere else, right? Let us send the monies directly to your account in your name. We are more than willing to do that. So you make them feel like I'm working with you, right? We're not just being difficult. We're working with you. Let's send this money to you and then you send it out. Oh no, the payment request was withdrawn. Okay, so you want me to send it out, but you won't send it out? Obviously, I'm going to think something with that, right? So that's how you deal with things like that in my experience. That's how I deal with it. That's how I tell my clients to deal with it. So it don't come across as if you don't have good customer service or you're not client focused or client driven, you know, all these words that they use. I'm very much client driven, but I am also compliance driven. And sometimes they don't see eye to eye. So to protect our institution, here's what we're going to do. Here's what we're willing to do. We're willing to work with you. Send us instructions. Let us pay you directly. Because normally their IBCs, when they want to go on vacation, they don't send it no place. They fund it to their personal accounts, right? So we could do that. So that's how you would handle something like that.
So how would you handle it if you have, members of senior management, like head of private banking, who wants to retain his client and doesn't want to rock the boats, and or members of the board or the owners who say no, listen, we need to send this payment out regardless. Just send this payment out. How do you handle that?
My first degree is journalism and mass communication. I can tell you, anytime I'm directed, watch my words, to transact a payment against my wishes, or you don't gotta worry, you getting a memo from me. I'm going to send you a memo or send you an email saying, as per your request, kindly note that this and this has been done. And then I can print it and keep it because things is go missing. So I have my own cover myself policy. Because if you could direct me to do something because you're the boss or you're the company owner or you don't want to lose this important client, that's all fine and good. You name senior management, you have a right to override my decision. But if you're adamant, right, that this request is going to be made, then I'm going to be adamant with you accepting responsibility for it, whether you want to or not, because I can put it in writing. And my experience, like I said to you, I send my emails and print it after I send it so it can be date stamped and keep it somewhere that only me and Jesus knows.
Right. Yes.
No, I didn't do it with this in the situation with the 20 million because I wanted a hands-off approach. I want nothing. I tell you up front, I am prepared to do it. So I didn't want to be bothered with sending you an email to say, I am not signing it. I told you I am not signing it. So I didn't want my name connected with it at all. I did the review, had a meeting, and that's it.
Situations where you may not have wanted to, but you said they were adamant, so you went ahead and did it, and then now you send a memo saying as per your request.
That's what Sam is asking. So Sam is saying that they're senior management, because that's how it works in international banks. Sometimes the client is so important to them, it's an important family, they don't want to lose the business, and that's all fine and good. And you're saying, oh, we have to make this payment. I mean, and then, like I tell you, like bold. So, with all due respect, can you sign off on the payment instruction? Not above my pay grade.
Oh, okay.
So if you're saying to me, I am directing you to do this, and I don't feel like getting fired that day, then I do it.
You do it, okay.
And then I write an email, because you have to cover yourself. Because what I've come to learn as a compliance professional, and I've been doing compliance for like the last 18 years, right? Senior managers come and go. Think about it. Especially those at the very top. Especially if they're expatriates. They on contracts, 2 years, 3 years. As you all know, the central bank requires that we hold documents for how long? Let me see if you all know.
5.
Okay, and in the case of Swiss banks, it's 10, because that's what the Swiss code is. So if I'm working for an institution based in Switzerland, where it's mandatory, sorry, that you retain documents for 10 years. How much CEOs do you think you could go through in 10 years? At least 2, right? Yes? So what you do is you cover yourself. You make sure every decision you make that is outside of you wanting to make it is documented. Now, like I said to y'all, I bold. So y'all, it might be a little different, and I've been doing this for a while. So obviously I would have increased in my experience, and I'm skillful of doing it, but I was pretty much, I was in maybe 5 years, the first time I get fired when I did the 20 million transaction. And that's been like from 2008, maybe. So you just have to figure out what it is that you can do. A lot of people doing this ICA course don't think about all of these things that we're talking about. They just think about the theory and being a compliance professional, and it looks good. And everybody says, oh, you know, it's a well-paying job, but it comes with a lot of responsibility. And if you happen to be the MLRO, your responsibility exponentially increases. Yes? So, I mean, y'all can spend the money, and I'm happy to be teaching y'all. Take these things into consideration. Yes?
Yes.
Okay, so
Okay.
we have another question before we move on to chapter 8, because we've been on this chapter 6 for a hot minute. No, sorry, 7 next. No, we can't skip 7. Sanctions is important. Everybody good on 6?
Yes, I'm good on 6.
Oh, AT is the only domestic strategy for combating terrorism.
Yes, ma'am. This is a small country. Okay, so let's see if we actually covered the learning outcomes on 6. Yes. Understanding how the international strategy for combating terrorism financing has developed via FATF. We talked about that. We didn't go too much into the EU's approach. We pretty much, our conversation was based on the Bahamas. Recognize how terrorists obtain their finance and be able to describe both various criminal methods and ways of obtaining legally derived funds. We talked about that. Appreciate the vulnerability of charities for use as conduits of terrorism funds. We've been talking about that. Be able to explain how terrorism funds are moved, including through the use of cash couriers, ARS, and international trade. This is where the diamond conversation came in. Do you guys understand what proliferation financing is?
Yep.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay. Be able to explain the risks associated with dual use items and understand how they might be identified. That was a conversation we had with Sam leading us. And understand the geographic, customer, and product service risks associated with proliferation financing. We didn't talk too much about the geographic nature, but obviously you can think about countries like, well, geographic from, yeah, we did actually. In the Bahamas, human smuggling, we kind of tied it to that, not necessarily terrorism or proliferation financing, but we did tie it to an illegal activity. So we're at 11 o'clock. Well, we're at 11:08. It's pretty like halfway through. Do you guys want to take like a 2-3 minute break, and then we're gonna go through unit 7? If we don't finish unit 8, because I have to leave at 12:30 today, we will use some of the beginning of next week's class to finish it. I don't want to rush through these because obviously your paper is going to be, when we discuss the paper next week, we need to ensure that we have fully covered all of the units. Yes?
Yes. Okay.
Question?
Yes.
Does anybody have a question? How the questions there? The first assignment. Anybody has the first assignment?
I do.
Yes.
I know I get it, but can somebody drop it in the chat?
Okay.
And is it a very long question, Angela?
Let me just try to find it.
Okay.
Yes, I have it.
Okay, so we're going to take a 5-minute break, and then we can come back and go through 7. We will try and start in today. If we don't finish, we will do some of next class to discuss the finish, unit 8, and then to discuss the paper. Yes?
Okay.
All right, so it's 11:10. We can come back at 11:15.
Okay.
Okay. Angela, when we come back, we'll want you to read the question for us. And also, if you can, I don't know if you tech savvy, you can put it inside the chat group for us.
I could probably take a picture and put it in there.
Okay, that's fine. Jarrell,
Yeah.
in the meantime, will look on the whatever, because she obviously tech savvy. And
Okay.
she'll put it in the chat group for us.
Okay.
Okay, 5 minutes.
Okay. All right.
We'll be back shortly. We're having a conversation. Give us 3 more minutes, please. Thank you. And we're back. My apologies. We were having an in-person discussion that I wanted to finish before we resume. Angela,
Yes.
are you ready for us?
Yes. You want me to read the first question?
Yes, please. We're
Okay.
reading the question only so you guys can, I'm reading it now. Let me tell you why I'm doing it now. So you guys can think about what we've discussed in the first 2 weeks, what we've discussed just now, and see how start to formulate in your mind. Okay, wait, we ain't talking about that yet. We talked about this, we already talked about that. Just so we can kind of gauge ourselves, because it'll be, in my opinion, best if we know from now what we're doing, right? As it relates to the assignment and the topics. Obviously, it's going to cover all of the topics that we've covered so far, but then we may read something and you may have said, oh, we didn't do that yet. We didn't talk about that yet, whatever situation is. Yes? Yeah. Okay,
Yes.
let's go, Angela. Thank you.
Okay, the first A. If your firm inadvertently transfers the proceeds of foreign tax evasion, does this constitute an offense of money laundering in your jurisdiction of choice?
You all had a jurisdiction of choice thing?
Yes.
This is why we discuss the Bahamas a lot.
And that's 15 marks.
Okay. Go on.
The second one, select a recent piece of work, last 5 years, carried out by the Financial Action Task Force or other regional FARF body and outline the rationale and significance of the work. Next one.
Yes,
Are we
please.
digesting that question?
John, listen, I just swallow a big gulp.
I think so.
Next one.
What protective framework should a firm put in place to guard against the impact of a potential sanctions breach?
We're going to
Next
sanctions.
question.
So y'all think, keep that in your mind, okay? Sanctions is unit 7. How much is that worth, Andrew?
15 marks.
And
The first three
one is 15 each?
All of the questions are 15 marks, except the last question, which is 25.
Okay.
Question number 4. Set out the key legal and regulatory frameworks that have been put in place in response to the terrorist attacks of recent years. Next question.
Does it give you the option of choosing a jurisdiction?
No, it doesn't.
Okay, so in this one you could use
you could use September 11, right? And what the US did, right? Basically.
You could use any of the information that's in the book and any of the information that you know from the Bahamas. It's wide.
Okay, next question. Explain the use of dual-use goods by terrorist organizations in achieving their objectives. Also, explain how proliferation financing can impact a firm. Can impact on a firm, yeah. Then the next question, which is 25 marks. Examine the nature of a risk-based approach to AML CFT and how to apply it. That's the questions.
Okay, thank you. Anybody scared?
That's a lot.
So we have a question in the classroom, right? Let me tell you what the question is. Do we have to do all of them or you can select?
All. No, that's a total of, you have to do all the questions. Pardon?
I say, Mr. Ferguson, I'm with you. I'm laughing. Yes, all of the questions.
Yes, we have to do all the questions.
So you can see that there are 2 questions on that we have not yet dealt with, right? Sanctions and risk management. And unit 8. Can anybody think about?
We can't hear you, Fareda.
I'm on mute. I'm on mute.
It's like you and
the volume just going up and down.
Yeah,
oh,
like,
it's probably the internet in here. I was saying, does anybody, y'all can see how we've talked about some of the questions already?
Yes, yes, we can.
Yeah.
Like the first question talk about tax evasion.
Right.
If you inadvertently transfers the proceeds of a foreign tax evasion, does this constitute an offense? If you inadvertently does it.
And that's the word you have to look at. And then you have to look at the circumstances around that, right?
Right.
And the law, right?
Exactly.
Or where the money live and for the country where it was evaded. Yes?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Right. So this is what I need you to be thinking about. Okay, good. Remember, and our conversation was led by Sam. Sam, you didn't read that question, eh?
I had looked at it briefly and just was putting the particular units that focuses on the questions. So I had a little look at that. The good thing about these questions is they said that it could be answered within any jurisdiction you pick. So we can, if you want to just pick the Bahamas, like I intend to do, be able to answer these questions from a Bahamian-based perspective. Yeah.
Correct. And this is why, even though we are going to cover everything in the book, now you understand the method to my madness.
Mhm. So in this first question, you don't have to, you could do any jurisdiction because it's a jurisdiction of your choice.
And in every question, I would advise, it's an advice, it's a suggestion. Let me put it like that. Choose a jurisdiction with which you are familiar.
Exactly. Mhm.
And I don't know, but Joel, is anybody familiar with another AML regime jurisdiction?
No.
Okay. All right, so let's go to 7. The learning objectives. The purpose of this unit is to consider the preventative measures that firms can put in place to manage the risks of becoming involved with terrorism financing and proliferation financing. Examine what sanctions are and why they are important. Define the types of sanction used within a global framework and how they are implemented in a variety of sanctions regimes. Explain how firms are required to respond in order to meet key responsibilities, and discuss the objectives of sanctions screening and consider how this can mitigate a firm's sanctions risk. I love the topic of sanctions. I'm actually doing a sanctions designation because I find it very interesting. And a lot of it is extraterritorial, which is also interesting for me. So, what are sanctions? This one, we talking all through this because I'll have a whole question on this. So we may not get to 8, but that's okay. We still have 3 hours next week to discuss the question. And so if we don't finish 8 today, we'll definitely do it next week. Yes?
All right.
This is a question, so I'm gonna need you all to understand this specific topic. What are sanctions? In somebody's own words, not in the word of the book. Jarell is answering, but y'all can't hear her. Jarell, you want to come this way? Jarell is going to come answer for us. In the meantime, somebody else could be thinking about what it is. Because I want it in your own words. I want y'all to understand exactly what it is.
Sanctions are penalties imposed on persons or organizations that violate the law.
Put down a net, we can catch a mosquito. She making sure. Anybody else? I mean, it is correct. Don't get me wrong. It's correct, but it's vague. Nobody know about sanctions. Hold on, before we do that, does everybody know about that there is a sanctions regime?
Yeah, I know from reading.
Because everybody may not be familiar with the concept of a sanctions regime if you're not in financial services. Outside of Mr. Ferguson and Sam, I think, may know, Jensen may know, Angela, I'm sure knows, Annie should know, everybody else, the attorney should know.
Yes, everybody.
Everybody's aware, right?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
good. All right, cool. So if you're aware, then tell me what it is.
Well, well, mine is even less in depth as the other lady than the other lady. It's just basically rules and regulations that are put in place based on certain actions. There's all types of sanctions. I guess that's the best. We did sanctions in intermediate. That's the best I could put it. I think I got to go and read my sanctions notes again from intermediate.
I'm waiting for this gentleman that's in person who did sanctions with me in intermediate to speak. I'm not going to call any name though, because I know I taught him sanctions in intermediate. Jarrell is answering, but y'all can't hear, and I'm happy y'all can't hear because I want somebody who on here to say it. Go ahead, Jarrell. You're right.
I can, oh,
Let's go, Jensen.
okay. Okay, well, my definition is similar to those that were presented. I would say a sanction is a tool used by either a country or an international body or organization to either to punish another country or individual or organization for activity that they deem to be either illegal or ones that basically activity that they should not be engaged in. And so the sanctions are used to apply pressure on them to change their behavior and to encourage them to, correct their course and to get in line with whatever international standard or rule or law there is that they're trying to get them to cease.
That is correct. Jarrell was saying the same thing in here, but I was waiting for another person to explain. But thanks, Jensen. Yes. So it's almost like it's a reactive and a proactive tool, because it's reactive because usually it's based on something that you would have already done. And it's proactive because it's going to discourage others from doing it. And
it's also to steer countries in the direction where you'd like them to go. Basically, if you want somebody to behave a certain way, you would restrict them from certain things in order to get the behavior that you want them to display.
Agreed. So that's the proactive nature or the proactive side of that, of using sanctions as a tool, right? Jarrell is saying that they're typically temporary, but there have some people been on sanctions for forever. So they're not supposed to be imposed for forever, but depending on one, who's imposing it, and two, why is it being imposed, the length of time varies. Yes, especially if it's going to violate human rights. Have you all heard anything about a country being sanctioned this week by the new US president? Anybody's keep up with world news?
Russia, they were putting sanctions against Russia. I don't know the details though, but there were sanctions against Russia, and I think there were new sanctions against certain Chinese individuals. That might have been at the very beginning of the year. But this past week, it was Russia.
And also sanctions against Myanmar.
Yes, that's what I was looking for. Myanmar is also being sanctioned by the new US president. Yes. So these are things, when you hear, because now you're aware, when you hear this on the radio, you'll be like, oh, I wonder why. Because you hear things like this all the time on the news, right? This country is being sanctioned, the US and China is in an international trade dispute. They sanctioning this one, they sanctioning the next one. Has anybody also heard about BBC getting kicked out of China? Okay, this y'all homework for the rest of your life if y'all won't be in compliance. World news is important. Yes?
Yes.
And you don't have to digest everything, but try and keep on the lookout for things that affects money. Just this week, China has forbidden BBC to air in China, period. You couldn't get it generally, but some hotels were allowed to play for their international guests and stuff. But some dispute they have going on. Yes. And so they have totally, if you look in here as it relates to targeted sanctions, it's a target sanction because they're banning the viewing. Yes.
Okay.
So, keep your minds and keep your ears open when things are happening around the world. So targeted sanctions, ban goods. You could also ban services. Y'all remember the travel ban that the former president put in place for those countries? It was lifted on day one. of the new
Yes,
presidency.
when Biden came in.
On day one, it was by an executive order, right?
Yes, yes. Mhm.
Right. So that can tell you how easily they can be put in place and how easily they can be taken away. The stroke of a pen. You do not need Congress. You do not need Parliament. You do not need Senate to do that. Yes?
Okay.
Which means that this is a very dynamic space. Today, you could wake up with something in place and a world leader decides something. Tonight, when you go to sleep, it's different, which is what I like about compliance. And this is why I've just kind of stuck with this area for so long, right? It ain't boring because you're trying to keep up with all of these things. Just have your mind alert, 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 alert. But I found that interesting because your life can be affected by somebody just like that. Because one day you may be able to go somewhere and the next day is a no, right?
Right.
I know in the pandemic, the travel ban that was put on the UK affected me. I bought my ticket. I figure I can leave to go to the UK, so why I can't come back, right?
Okay.
If you didn't have a US passport, you weren't a US person or didn't have immediate family members in the US, even though you could go to the UK from the US, you cannot land in the US. So I had to change tickets twice to try and get back home after taking my daughter to university. I had to land in Canada, sleep in the airport because they ain't letting you out, and be out of their airport in 24 hours, else you can't land. They put you back on the plane to get home, which means travel bans, you ain't do nothing. I don't know sanctions list, right? And it wasn't even a sanction per se. It was just a stroke of the pen because of the pandemic. I'm just using that as an example to show you guys how you have to stay current, because when I bought my ticket, I took it for granted that I can leave so I can return. It wasn't until I was informed by someone from the embassy that no, you can't land. Luckily for me, I was able to make the changes, right? Remember during the pandemic a few months ago, the Prime Minister was saying, if you don't have enough money to stay in the people country for 2 weeks, don't go. Yeah. Because travel bans could be enacted in a second. Leaders have the right, not necessarily from a sanctions perspective, but they have the right to close their borders whenever they feel like. And they can do it for whatever purpose. So obviously they can do it for sanctions, right? So dual use items, we talked about that. Software, technology. You can use them for good and bad. Now it says, why are sanctions relevant to the financial sector? Y'all read that? That's key. Nobody answering me? The answer right in the same section. In
Yeah,
2 sentences. Okay, let me guide y'all where you all need to be answered me from. Look at section 2. Yes. Mr. Neely is saying the second paragraph. This is the answer. Financial institutions and the financial sector businesses act as a front line against financial crime. What's the point of putting things in place? You're trying to stop some illicit activity, right? And financial sector is at the front. It's a regulatory requirement because the money from the illegal or illicit activity has to go somewhere. Money don't leave the earth. Yes?
Yeah.
So it is either 2 places, in or out. of the financial sector. Nothing else. That's it. Y'all agree?
Absolutely.
Right.
Yes, yes.
And so we are charged as gatekeepers to ensure that the proceeds from financial crime does not end up in. Now, we already know it ain't in, it could be out, right? The whole of our purpose is to ensure that it doesn't get in, because the reality of it, crime is going to be around for forever. But you don't want your institution to be used, or you don't want to mediate or facilitate any illicit proceeds. And so that's why it's important, because as it relates to sanctions and the end product, which is obviously somebody enriching themselves for whatever reason, the money got to go somewhere. And if the financial services sector isn't trying to combat as effectively as possible the entrance of the money into the system, you could forget it. Because once it get in, that's it over. Right?
Right. Right.
Okay, so there's a global sanctions framework. Now, I know we have some SCB registrants and some central bank registrants. Let's discuss the sanctions framework in the Bahamas, and then we're going to discuss the global sanctions framework, because 3.1, the UN sanctions regime, is exactly what it is that we have in the Bahamas. Does anybody know I think we discussed this in one of the classes previously. How is this carried out in the Bahamas? Let me see if y'all could remember what we be talking about, if I be talking here myself in the day. Jensen, help them if Mr. Ferguson can't help them.
How was what carried out? I just want to be specific when you say how
The
was.
sanctions regime in the Bahamas.
Okay. Well, I can listen to Jensen.
Man, wait, hold on.
I was just about to say, we should listen to Mr. Ferguson.
Sorry for that. But
okay, I don't have a specific answer right now.
Help your fellow gentlemen out.
Okay, so what happens in my institution, the Central Bank of the Bahamas and the SCB, they send out notices from the UNSCR, United Nations Department, and they would send it to the organization. They would send in a list of either persons or entities or a combination, and they would ask us, do you have this person in your institution as a client or as an entity? And so therefore, you have to do your search to make sure that those names that they have presented are not as your clients, or they are. And either which way, you have to send back like a form, I think it's called Form 1A, declaring, yes, we have these persons, or no, we don't have these persons. And you have to send that to the regulators. And that's how we generally comply with the sanctions listing with the United Nations.
Bang.
Okay.
Hold on. Anybody have any questions? Because I know Sam said exactly how it works, and I don't know if you all understood what he said. Okay, Sam, our internet here obviously dropping. You want to say it again? Give us a second, Simone. Let me let Sam say it again, because in person, they didn't hear you very clearly, Sam. Sorry.
Okay, no problem. I will try to speak up. So what usually happens in my institution, the regulators, the Central Bank of the Bahamas, or the SCB, Securities Commission, they would send the United Nations sanctions listing, asking us if we have any persons or entities on the United Nations sanctions list.
Losing him. Not
I'm
hearing.
sorry. All right, can you hear me now?
Yeah, better now.
Can you start over?
Yes, please, because you're in and out. It's like you faded off.
Oh, maybe it's the internet connection and here as well. So what happens is the regulators, the central bank and the SCB would send in United Nations sanctions listing, asking us we have any persons or entities on the sanctions listing. And then what you would do is you would check the system to see if identified persons or entities, if you have them as a client, and then you would respond to a form called a Form 1A, I believe, to the central bank or the SCB saying we do not have the listed persons or entities as clients, and or we do have the listed persons or entities as clients, and you send those back to the regulators.
That is the same process that is done in our institution.
Everybody got that? Simone, you still have a question?
Yes, I am trying to remember whether or not it's the national risk, the identified risk framework coordinator who's the middle person. I think it right now is Miss Nottage. I'm just trying to remember if I'm confusing her position with something else, but if she acts as like the middle person to make sure that you know, that information, those designations are disseminated throughout the organization.
I don't know if she's the middle person, but she works with the Office of the Attorney General, who is in charge of the sanctions regime in the country.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's, you may be confusing some of the things she does, but she does work with the AG's office. And yes, the AG is the responsible person in the country for the sanctions regime, the framework. And that is how the framework in the Bahamas works. It's based on the United Nations Securities Council resolution. So it's called, we call it UNSERS in our compliance language, UNSCR. That's the regime. You also have to disclose to the FIU. Now they have made it where you don't have to disclose unless you have a hit, right? So remember me telling you, you're going to have to check your database anyway, to check to see what the client's doing, to check to see if there's any negative news. This is mandatory. So this is how you're going to find out about your international clients. Now, not everything that's news is true. We know that, right? And then two, you have to you have to be able to determine, civil proceedings different from criminal proceedings. Because a civil case is just that, right? It just means Alma hit me, I hit her back, we row in, but we ain't commit no crime. But Alma suing me because I tell Alma something negative, right? And I suing Alma back because she tell me just what I tell her. That's civil. That's handled differently, right? So when you're doing your searches, remember, not everything that you read on your client, one, is true. Two, a civil matter is different from a criminal matter because your job is to ensure the reputation, obviously, of your firm isn't brought into disrepute, but unless the civil matter is something of significance, right? Then that's not something for you to be overly concerned with. Because most times civil matters don't involve no money, unless it's a civil litigation for whatever the situation is. Yes? We're trying to keep the bad money out. Yes?
So you said it goes from UNSERS?
Yes.
No. UNSERS is the whole regime, the United Nations Security Council resolutions. That is what our regime is built on. So the agents.
Sorry. This foreign affairs page is a foreign affairs page. That's our sanctions then. This is the sanctions that we have. Well, the sanctions that we have to be mindful of. I see a Ministry of Foreign Affairs. They have a page, international obligations.
I know it was on the AG's website. It's on the government's website. I don't know if it's on Foreign Affairs page, but it's definitely on the government website because actually it covers the entire Bahamas, only financial services.
This is the UN sanctions, international obligations,
That would
UN
be,
sanctions.
they probably just copied it from the AG's page, yes.
Okay, all right, okay, thank you.
But if you want to look at it from one of the regulators or directly from the AG, just to make sure that it's the current information.
Okay, thank you.
So the Security Council list is what we use in the Bahamas, right? So you see number 3 is talking about global sanctions framework. That is the framework in which we in the Bahamas operate under. Financial sanctions, all of this comes under the UN sanctions regime. So when we do our UN sanctions checks, all of these things are included. If you look at the end of section 2, you will see that there are some specific countries that have ongoing sanctions. These will always come up until they change. And if there is a change to them, the regulator will send out a notice to the licensees. So Somalia, Iraq, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Sudan, North Korea, Libya, Guinea, Bissau, Central African Republic, Yemen, South Sudan, Mali. You all know what ISIL is?
Yeah, that's ISIS.
Yep. Yeah, that's their actual legal name. No, ISIL.
The Alpha Levant.
It is, we call it ISIS, but ISIS has a name, ISIL.
Yeah.
Right? But obviously it's commonly known as ISIS. And then you can see some other regimes, right? Those are, if you're in financial services, you'll know that those always come up on the listing. The financial sanctions is only one element that is used to achieve the objectives, right? You could target specific people, like what was done this week from the people from Myanmar, because they didn't target the whole country. It was specific persons that were going to be sanctioned, right? And then you could target the subsidiaries of designated persons, because these persons may own companies. So to make sure you cover everything and the regime is all encompassing, it make no sense you targeting Mr. Ferguson. I'm only using you as an example. And he ain't target Mr. Ferguson businesses, and he ain't target Mr. Ferguson family, because all he can do is move the things from him to them, right? So they try to make it as all encompassing as possible. So in the sanctions regime, the UN has its methodology with which they put it in place. Yes? And so that everybody in the country is on the same page, that's what is used. FATF standards. FATF have its own recommendation as it relates to the best practice as for targeted financial sanctions related to terrorism and terrorism financing. It's a guidance, right? Come on, people, talk to me. Hello?
Hello.
Anybody home with the door crack? If you're going quiet. This is a question, you know. Yes?
Yeah, that might have gone a little deep.
Okay. So FATF guidance, because remember now when you're answering your questions, you're gonna have to do some research and you're gonna have to do some referencing.
Right.
Yeah?
Yes.
Right. Note to self, eh?
Yes.
Right. Okay. So there's a guidance put out by FATF that you should read. Yes?
Yes.
Good. The guidance covers targeted financial sanctions related to terrorism and terrorism financing. And then it also covers effective freezing regimes. Now, anybody could tell us what a freezing regime is all about?
Okay.
What about our law enforcement people? You all should know about freezing regimes, especially our law enforcement officer who's sitting inside the classroom. Y'all can hear him?
No, sorry.
Hold on, let me let him come. I pick it on him because he was my student before, so I know what he know or what he should know, right? Because he didn't do a whole class with me. So he ain't feel no way. He know that's how I am. Come, Mr. Neely, come tell them what you know, because we talk about this in intermediate.
From what I remember from that, possibly did so many years back. A freezing regime, it has something to do with when an institution is able to, I don't want to use freeze, when they hold your resources away from you, or when they withhold your resources, whether it's financing, in most cases, monetary, for the purposes of an investigation or for some reason such as that, something would have done or some kind of suspicion would have come about that would cause them to, hey, let me freeze this monies to do further investigation.
It depends. So Jurel is asking if the regime is going to be against the organization and everyone associated with it. From a sanctions perspective, if they're going to freeze your assets, all they want to do is make sure you don't have use of it. You can't use it. You can't use it to do nothing. And so if it's a company, obviously, if you can't use the money, how are you going to operate? Yes? So it is a very effective tool because we go as individuals. You touch my money, we have a problem, right? So you can imagine how effective that is as a tool to make sure you do what you're supposed to do, or to do what you said you were going to do. Yes, it is very, very, very effective to combating terrorism-related funds or assets. Because if you ain't got no money, you can't commit no terrorism act, no terrorist act, because you need money to buy weapons of mass destruction. You don't just make weapons of mass destruction for a large scale with $2. But if I cut off the money to you, yes, then I take away your power to carry out, to perform the acts with which you wish to perform. So from a sanctions perspective, FATF encourages and gives guidance on how countries freeze it, how the United Nations freeze it, the UK, EU, all, how the US, how they use freezing regimes to ensure that you don't have access to the funds, right? So it deters you. It can dismantle your operation because if you ain't got no money, it make no sense having no company, right? It could force you to go around the system because remember, now the money in and out. Yes. And it also encourages international cooperation. Because if the terrorist act was going to be committed against someone in your country or against your country, and you are helping to ensure that they don't have access to it, we cooperating. I'm making sure the people who committing the acts ain't getting the money, which means I helping you and you helping me. Because we're not having a terrorist attack here, but we're all working together because nobody letting the money go through. Yes? So it's a very effective tool. So when you talk about the freezing regime, FATF has the recommendations that speak to if you get a match when you're doing your searches, right? And how you can go about determining whether it's a false positive search or whether it's a true search, right? It talks about making somebody a designated person under sanctions regime and delisting them. So sometimes you would get from your regulator, somebody that's actually come off the list. They remove people off the list sometimes. And there's a process around doing that, right? Because if I've already complied with your orders, it would be unfair for you to have me remain on the list, right? obviously the regime would have worked. The sanctions regime would have worked. I would have complied. Right? So you also should ensure within compliance, you have adequate controls in place. And also, like I said to you, because the act covers the entire country and the the sanctions regime covers entire countries, it's not only for financial services, right? It's for the entire country. So the private sector as well has to be involved. So then it goes on to speak to obviously the EU sanctions regime, which is similar. Yes. And the UK sanctions regime, which is similar. It just speaks to who's responsible for it in that country, in those countries, right? It goes to talk about the UK's legal framework. They also have UN sanctions. Y'all seeing that, right? It's 318 on my page, 5.1. Y'all seeing that? But only the people in the class answering. What happened to the people online? Y'all seeing it in the book? I'm going by the book.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, we're seeing it.
Yes, we're seeing it.
Which tells you how broadly used the UN measures are, right?
Right.
Right. It talks about all of the acts in the UK and the orders, what is required to freeze accounts. It talks about the penalties and the offenses. You will find in certain acts for us, you have to think about all of the acts that would govern financial services. Think about the offenses and the penalties that come underneath them.
Okay.
And it goes on to talk about complying with the UK sanctions requirement. Just how they have a regime, the regime that Sam so eloquently outlined for us. That's the requirements for us. And by doing exactly what he says is how we comply. It speaks to the regulator in the UK who is responsible for the UK sanctions regime in this country. It's pretty much SCB, central bank, but all of the regulators pretty much, right? You know, we have a group of financial services regulators. They now have a body, but all of the regulators are responsible to ensure that their licensees are compliant with the sanctions regime in the country. So you have to have, in the UK, sanctions-based risk assessments. You need policies and procedures, and you need the screening and escalation of potential and actual matches. For us, once you have a hit, or if your client happens to be on the list, the escalation procedure for us is you inform your regulator and you inform the FIU. That's how it gets escalated. And they, in turn, will inform the Attorney General's office. You don't go to the AG's office directly. You go to your regulator.
Okay.
Okay? The U.S. financial sanctions regime, OFAC. Have anybody heard of OFAC?
Yes.
That's a regime that's been in place before we even had a specific UNSCR regime in the Bahamas. If you're working in banking, you know, we run all the clients against this OFAC list, right? That's the list that everybody was familiar with before the UN one was deployed in the country. We still do. Most institutions still use OFAC. Yes?
Okay.
Yes.
Because we're so intricately connected and our dollar is so tied, you do not want to contravene anything related to OFAC and their sanctions regime. Yes, that is a very critical regime, and their program is very robust. Now, I know for a fact that if you have a client or if you want to make payments to certain persons on OFAC list, there's a process for which you can get approval to do so.
Ms. Sands, sorry, since you brought it up, I have a question since you brought it up concerning the OFAC. Let's say you have a client. So let's say let's say you're dealing with a country that's on the sanctions list, but you know that the OFAC also has the general licenses that permit certain transactions to still take place under certain requirements. Would you still feel comfortable and performing those transactions in sanctions countries under the general license and feel assured that you won't run afoul of OFAC penalties?
If they have general licenses, and you do have some uncomfortability with performing the transaction, you can reach out to OFAC, you know.
Okay.
You can reach out to OFAC and they assist. They will give you guidance if you ask, especially if the transaction is going to be US denominated.
Right.
Yep. And then to the financial institutions that like facilitate the payment transactions, like they have built-in safeguards in place where either countries, individuals, or organizations that are sanctioned are automatically stopped if indeed that's the intended beneficiary, and that's updated very regularly. So even with the individual sanctions, as they come out, the system would be updated. And so if you inadvertently or if you made a judgment call to sanction that payment, then at the end of the day, it's still going to be stopped. And then those who have the responsibility to contact the OFAC, whatever body it is that they need the approval from, would then take it from there.
Thanks, Jensen. Yes, because I know Cuba was on OFAC's list for a hot minute, and any transaction you send to any company with the word CUBA in it ain't going nowhere. It ain't leaving the bank. Now, when it gets to that place, compliance gets involved because the payment is going to be stopped automatically by the system, right? So compliance will then have to look at the actual request and manually approve it. When I say manually, a human being got to look over it, see that it's a legitimate company, just have, let's just say I don't know what name, but CUBA in it, right? Cuba Libre, but it's an American company for whatever reason, right? Because it has CUBA in it, the payment ain't gonna leave. So when the payment is brought to compliance for approval, which normally happens, compliance is able to determine, oh, it just has CUBA in it, the system automatically stopped it. So let me look at this transaction. It appears that all is in order. They will manually override the system to allow the payment to go through. Jensen, I right? That's how I remember it to be.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So like Jensen said, the blocking is automatic in most instances because not only do you run a search against your client database frequently in order to remain compliant, the IT systems are updated regularly to ensure that nothing goes through. I'm not saying it's foolproof, nothing is foolproof, but it's pretty robust as it relates to allowing transactions to go through from institutions because the penalty is so severe for the institutions. They ain't trying to pay it. They sanctions penalties is being the billions. And I say billion with the B, not damn. Does anybody know of any institution that was fined for breaching sanctions?
No. Sorry. No.
What my next question could be?
Research this.
Very smart, very smart. You must be a Ferguson. Look it up. Very interesting indeed. And it's not locally, okay? It's not locally.
Hey, then right now locally.
Pardon?
This reaches locally or?
No.
Okay. Not locally. Okay. And this is specifically related to OFAC.
It's specifically related to fines for banks when they breach sanctions. So let me just give you one. HSBC, $1.9 billion.
Stop it.
Billion.
Stop it. That's 2 billion.
Yeah. And they only breached the US one, so you can imagine.
Wow.
Right. So the one that I thought you guys may have known about is the BNP Paribas one, because they get a fine, get this, $9 billion.
Wow.
Yeah, 9 with a B, like probably multiple times our country's GDP. Yeah, that.
It's our complete national debt.
Thanks. And they still in business. Can you believe it? Most of the large banks, when you all look it up, most of the large banks have been fined. Some obviously you could think about how it happened, and some just blatant. Because there have been cases where they know they were sending the money to sanction people and sanction countries. So what they would have done in the wire transfers, they would have left out pertinent information, right? So they would remove certain information. So now, I don't know if you all know, but if you don't have every single solitary piece of information required to do a wire transfer, it ain't done. Before time, using SWIFT, you could have kind of gotten away with leaving some things out. Once the beneficiary was there, and the sender was there, all that information in between, some of that could have been left out. Not today. Everything has to be included. All of the required information, or your wire will bounce.
Hi, I have a question. Has there ever been any situation where a name was left off the sanctions list?
We ain't gonna know. How we gonna know?
Wow.
You see what I'm saying? If it ain't on the list, we ain't know it's supposed to be on the list, because we ain't know who actually won't put the sanctions against that person or that company. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Interesting. Interesting.
That's one of those things that, boy, if you don't know, you don't know. 7 is talking about complying with financial sanctions regime. We talked about our domestic one, and then also the non-domestic ones. So for us, that would still be the our regime. Domestic includes the international ones, because obviously we're an international financial center, right?
Right.
So it includes, all of the retail banks. It definitely includes all of the private banks as well. All kind of examples in here for penalties imposed on non-US banks for breaching US sanctions. You only even have to go to the internet for that. 7.22 BNB Paribas, 8.9 billion. Yeah, you know why? They was leaving out, you see what it say? Guilty to a hat trick of sanctions violations, right? By concealing certain transactions. You see what they were doing? So you all read that example. That's the example I was alluding to when I was asking you all to do the research. Y'all even got to go to the internet, right? So a consequence of imposing sanctions happens to be people who need humanitarian aid. It's difficult for them to get it. Remember, if you look at some of the countries that I said are, to me, permanent on that list, right? some of those countries have really, really great humanitarian needs. You all know Sudan. They have a humanitarian need that is of epic proportion, right? But if Sudan on the list, how you gonna help them? Because how are you going to get finances to a country sanction? So if you look at 7.3, it talks about the humanitarian needs. You see the questions that have to be answered, because they will allow, obviously the Red Cross goes there, there's some other charities that are allowed to operate there, because you can't let people die because of certain things government does, right? That would be a crime against humanity, and also the United Nations have their own rules regarding humanitarian needs and aid. And if you have the UN sanctions regime in your country, obviously you also have to ensure that you're following their guidance as it relates to humanitarian aid, right? So there's a balance, and it's a very delicate balance. And I'm in my experience and from my knowledge, humans lose. Humans lose. So you have a whole sector of persons that suffer because their country, right, by no act of their own, has been sanctioned. That's something to think about. Yes?
Indeed.
Yes.
Jarrell is saying if the countries are so far gone that they cannot come back. To be honest, I'm not sure, because sometimes they adjust. They figure, we're a sovereign country, we're gonna do what we want to do. Why should we have to listen to y'all? Yes. So even though you may say, why aren't they playing nicely? Their position may be, why I have to play with y'all? I won't play with y'all. A lot of these countries are democratic anyway. Yes, if you look at it, they're not democratic. So the leadership is going to make the decision for everybody underneath it. And some of them, they ain't really, in my opinion, care, because they straight. These are countries with leaders that have wealth, or that have raped their countries of the wealth. So the people in the country suffering, but they ain't suffering. So it really don't matter to them. Yes? So when you talk about sanctions, you have to design a compliance framework around it. You have to perform risk assessments. You have to ensure that you have policies and procedures and training in place. You have to define the roles and the responsibilities. And you have to have tools in place that helps you screen, because this cannot be done manually. There is no way you can do the screening at the level that is required manually. Most institutions would have purchased software, we call them screening tools, and have controls in place to allow you to screen your clients against all of these lists and to have your database searched. Yes, to ensure that you're compliant with the sanctions regime in your country. And the tools obviously are going to be based on the size and complexity of your institution. So I know the bigger firms, the Swiss-based ones, they would purchase a tool that can be deployed in all of their subsidiaries around the world. And obviously that's going to be, a costly endeavor, but I prefer to pay a couple $1 million for the tool than get fined $9 billion. Yes? So for all of us that work in financial services, we all know about the tools and running it because it's the same tool that you use pretty much for the transaction monitoring with some specificity, right? But it's the same name because the names are going through, right? It's still the same. You're using the same client database because it's your client database. It's proprietary. And then if you come up with a hit, it's the compliance officer's job to go and ensure that the hit is either a true hit or a false positive or a false hit, because it can be completely erroneous because people have the same name, right? Or it could be someone with the same name, some of the same information, but it's not the same person. And here in this instance, this is another instance where training is necessary. How many of you all know in Latin American countries, you have your mother and your father name?
Yes.
That could trip you up on a search. You have to be aware of what happens in the countries where your clients reside. Same thing in Spain. In some countries, the man take on the woman name. Yes, in some countries, the last name goes first. All of these things you learn through training and experience, of course. So you have to ensure that your staff is well trained. You have to ensure that the technical resources are also available to your staff. It has to be a balanced approach, right? It says risk-based approach. It has to be balanced because your staff can look at thousands of transactions. That's what you have an electronic search tool for. And then your electronic search tool don't have a brain. This is why you have a compliance officer who can pick things out and go through analytically, because whilst technology can do some analytical work and you could, employ algorithms and all of that, you still need a human being to say, this is this and that is that. If you come up with a false positive, because if the system already tell you that's the person, how are you going to say it's not? You need a person to do that, right? So when you have hits, you have to be able to investigate those and then determine, oh, it's true or it's not. And then you also have to check your system, check the quality by testing the system and testing the tools which you're using. Because if you employ, or if your company employs more than one search tool, there are various tools, 360 KYC, for those who don't know, then you have World Check, then you have LexisNexis. If you're using all of these tools in conjunction with your own proprietary tool, you can know not all of the search engines have the same information. So you may get a hidden World Check, but that hidden in LexisNexis, right? So you as a compliance professional need to be aware that, hey, how come I get this hit in here and I get this hit in there, and then Google saying this, and then, you have to constantly ensure that the quality of your data is good. Because I think it's Jaffe that works in analytical, you only could base your results based on the quality of data. Amen. If the data quality sucks, your results suck. Those are tools that are used in the financial services industry to check clients, right? And they are private tools that banks normally pay for to use, and they would screen their clients against those tools. Some companies have a proprietary software, so they would include like Wall Street Journal tool, and then they have their own tool that's built specifically for them, and they merge them, and so it's proprietary to that institution, right? Like I said, it has to be training. It has to be communication. What? Sorry, Jarell is asking a question.
What level in this career, in this field, is responsible for designing? I know you have different levels of
The designing of what?
The compliance framework.
It depends. It depends on how big the institution is. So if you have a small institution, it's you. the board will mandate whatever, and you come up with, okay, this is what's required. Sorry, the question Jarell is asking is, what level is responsible for it? If it's a small institution, you're it. Because you're probably the head of compliance, you're probably the MLRO, right? And if you are hired and you meet something in place, it's you who's going to determine whether it's sufficient or not. So the board of directors only will know that the institution compliant. How they become compliant is your job, right? If you go into an institution and you recognize, hey, this manual business ain't gonna work, then it is up to you to report to the board of directors with whom you have a direct contact that, hey, the institution, there is a gap. You identify the gaps. Any job you go on, this is what you need to do, especially compliance. Once you get there and you have an opportunity to go through some things, you identify the gaps and then you figure out how to plug them. Because they can fall in your lap. You can't keep saying, like the politicians say, oh, that one do it, and we meet them doing it. No. As the MLRO, the buck is going to stop with you because the board hired you thinking that you're going to be competent enough to do just that, keep the institution safe. So now at larger institutions, they have huge compliance teams, they have head of compliance, they have whatever, right? But smaller institutions, especially in the Bahamas, as head of the department and the MLRO is you. You're it. You determine how much needs to be put in place to ensure that as best as possible, you can mitigate the risks against your institution. Yes? And Wolfberg also has guidance, and so does OFAC. They produce guidance. Wolfberg, who knows who Wolfberg is? We didn't cover that? Huh? We ain't talk about Wolfsburg? We talk about Wolfsburg. Oh, I was in class. The first class we talked about, Wolfsburg is the group of what? Pardon?
The group of financial institutions.
Yes, thanks, Sam. I think it's like 13 or 14 of them, right?
Just ones, yeah.
Right. So you all go back to chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it in there. Because that is going to be handy and you're going to need Wolfsburg throughout this entire course, AML and GRC. So get familiar with it.
All right.
Okay?
Okay.
Hi, sorry, I have a question. I was trying to remember earlier, a question was asked about whether or not an employee is protected if there's any acts or legislation. I think it's against the terrorist financing. I know I read earlier about the POCA, the Proceeds of Crime Act. This is on page 71 going way back, and it was saying that it does protect the employee if they're not knowledgeable of certain situations.
Right, every act protects, even the bank's policy protect you if you're not knowledgeable. But did you see the part where it says you should have been knowledgeable? Because in POCA, if depending on your role and your rank, if you don't know, is not an excuse because they're going to determine if you should have known. So that's going to be the measure and the yardstick that is used against the compliance officer. Now, generally, regular employees is different, but you remember now, as a compliance officer, you're going to be held to a different standard. Yes?
Yes.
You should know. So it's going to be very difficult for you to convince anybody that a transaction occurred, right? And you had no knowledge, especially if it's obviously, a significant transaction. Because the first defense is going to be, you should know. And when I say you, not necessarily you as a person, but the team, the compliance team. Yes?
Understood, but I know at some banks, they only have like the head compliance officer regulated and some staff underneath them working in the area is not a regulated individual.
Yeah, so you don't got to worry, but if you're in the head, it ain't gonna fall on you. It gonna fall on the head because the head should know. Now, when I say it ain't gonna fall on you, all of the acts that are covered during your annual training, you should know what you should and shouldn't be doing under those acts.
Okay, I see where you headed.
Right.
The bank does do like
Annual
6 months training and annual training and stuff. So if you don't have the qualification as the ICA or money laundering, you have been trained throughout the years, and that's how they protect themselves. Okay, okay,
That's what they get you.
okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So that doesn't even make no sense, but nothing in because we can't protect it.
No, but see, you working in a financial institution, so for you, you might say that, but for a private citizen who ain't getting no annual training, they could come with the fact that they ain't know. Because remember, now poker covers everybody.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so it's 12:32. I have a 1 o'clock appointment, so we're gonna have to stop here today. I hope the discussion helps you when you're learning and makes it practical for you, because I know the book, when you read it, could be overwhelming because it's a lot to digest. So when you go back over 6 and 7, which I expect you to do because y'all have questions coming out of this, if you can, please also read 8. And we'll take the first hour of next week's class to discuss chapter unit 8. I'm going to be dropping some information in the chat during early next week. So please pay attention to the chat. And if you're not a part of the chat, please let Jarrell know. Y'all could send our message before we log off today. You could private message her right on this. Let her know that you're not a part of the chat. Give her your number so she can add you. And we're going to have a discussion in the chat early next week, okay?
Okay. All right.
All right. So thanks everyone for your participation. And any questions that you come up with during the week, just drop them in the chat and we'll discuss.
All right. Thank you. Happy Saturday, everybody.
Have a good evening.
Thank you. Safe.
Have a great day.
Have
You
a
too.
good afternoon. See y'all later.
Jarrell, you see somebody, Annie is sending you a message before they cut it off. You see it? Somebody else needed to be added. Hold on. Okay, all right.